Welcome to Wild Questions. I'm Sabbath Kapahu, and this is the moment we take each week to have the conversations we know are important, but we don't always talk about. This is about the stories that matter behind the questions we ask. I'm joined by my friend, colleague, and CEO of WiLD Leaders, Dr. Rob McKenna. Dr. McKenna, what are you thinking about today?
Well, what I'm thinking about, Sabbath, that is normal for you. So if anyone doesn't know this, you're sitting on the Big Island. Okay, so what are you doing today on the Big Island?
That's a great question. I'm going to sit in my office for most of the day on the Big Island. It's funny because when you think about Hawaii, you automatically assume that people will spend their days enjoying the beach and the waterfall
Right?
and all the
Right. That's all you do, right?
actually we have to work. So we're going to be in our office. But I am going to go on a walk, rain or shine. So I'll
Yeah.
get there.
It's like it's the same for you, right? It's like if I live in Seattle, so I just spend all my time in those beautiful mountain ranges, or I
Yeah.
just sit in the rain, which is
Yeah.
actually kind of true.
Oh,
That's good.
yeah. So that's what I'll be doing today. But we want to talk about something that you were thinking about at the gym this morning. You told me you were there working out and you had this idea about cruising altitude. So tell me more about that.
So first of all, I was with that whole gym thing is interesting because you and I have talked about this before, that I think I do my best thinking when I'm exercising.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate because there's no way to capture, like there probably are, but the way that my mind works, and it's not rocket science, I bet it's just there's more oxygen going to my brain, quite literally. And so it's probably why, that's happening. But I was listening to the dumbest podcast that someone recommended to me. I don't know if I'm the only one, but where someone recommends, they go, "It's a great podcast, you're gonna love it." And I was listening, I was like, this is the stupidest podcast. but but I did get something interesting because there was a reference to something that made me think about the WiLD Toolkit. And the one of the things inside the WiLD Toolkit, and by the way, what I'm going to talk about now is what's called integrated fulfillment. We have this integrated fulfillment index, which is this allows you to very simply assess how fulfilled you're feeling across several domains of your life, like family, friends, health, finances, work, career, personal development, spiritual life, service to others. Yeah, and it's a bunch of these gauges like this. And this is, by the way, this is not the main point. I would not suggest to you that fulfillment is the main point behind our lives, which you and I will have a conversation around another day. But it's an important thing that we understand and assess these things. And one piece of this is that assessment is important. One of the reasons that assessment is important is not because of some score you'll get, but because of the questions that it raises for us. So if I don't have a chance to assess, I don't have a chance to see where I am. And what I was thinking about this morning is that I love it that these are gauges.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to share whose scores these are, but these are different. These are gauges of fulfillment across these areas of my life. And what it got me thinking about was this idea of cruising altitude. And that one of the goals that we could have, because people have asked me all the time, like, what is a good score on integrated fulfillment or on any of these different pieces of data in the toolkit that relate to anything? And I always say trending upward. Mm-hmm. And this idea of cruising altitude kind of fascinates me because when it comes to these gauges, like, what is your cruising altitude when it comes to these different areas of your life? And I think it's necessary for a couple of reasons. Is that we know turbulence is coming. If there is one certainty in life, turbulence is coming. And so I think as we've worked with leaders and as I see this in my own life, and you and I have talked about this, that there are going to be moments where some of these gauges go down, where my fulfillment goes down or my resourcing goes down, or just it gets tough.
Yeah.
And the more of these kinds of gauges, this is why assessing and kind of trending upward on as many of them as possible and sort of bringing that, I don't know if balance is the right word, but trending upward, because the moments are coming, but you can imagine if all these gauges dipped at once.
Yeah.
How fast a plane could go down.
You're pushing hard and fast.
Yeah. And it's like my wife and I were talking about this the other night, that in our marriage, after a couple decades of being married, it's like if my marriage was struggling on top of when other things are challenging, that could almost feel overwhelming. And so I think one of the goals of this is that we find our cruising altitude as much as possible in each of these areas. because then we know that those tough times are coming. The turbulence is going to come, and that pilot's going to get on there and go like, "We've got to lower the altitude pretty quickly, so get tight, put on your seatbelt." You know those moments are coming. But if we could find our cruising altitude in more areas, that it might help us. And so I think that's why assessing on those different things and having a conversation, because the other reality is that those things are happening for every person in every organization. You don't have to be a family member to feel all those things. And so being able to understand, what it means, what fulfillment looks like in all those areas to build wholeness, even in our workplaces, I think would be powerful.
Because each of those gauges represents a part of the person's whole story, and each person has all of those gauges that the needle is moving on all the time. And if we don't know
Absolutely.
or take time to have the conversations about where those needles are, we're just going to assume that we're operating at a certain space or trending a certain way, and it could be the exact opposite.
Which is so the norm, isn't it? Like people, I think so often we function without that level of intention.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
cruising altitude.
Cruising altitude. Thank you for taking time to explain that and telling us what you're thinking about today.
Thanks, Sabbath.